The war did not begin with missiles. It began with a miscalculation that no one wanted to admit. At 2:11 a.m. Tehran time. The lights in a secure underground command facility flickered not enough to trigger alarms. Just enough for a trained eyes to notice something was wrong. Screens refreshed a fraction of a second too late as satellite feeds started. An encrypted data stream briefly desynchronized before snapping back into place. For most systems, it was nothing. For the people watching, it felt like a warning across the world. In Washington, D.C., the same anomaly appeared almost simultaneously. Different systems, different satellites, same hesitation, the kind of pause that only happens when machines are forced to choose between conflicting instructions. No explosions followed, no sirens screamed, but somewhere between those two capitals, something invisible had shifted. President Jonathan Hale was awake when the report reached his desk. He had not slept properly in weeks. Middle Eastern briefings had replaced domestic policy. Drone footage had replaced polling data. The word containment had quietly disappeared from conversations, replaced by phrases like response window and acceptable escalation. The intelligence summary was short, too short. Unidentified cyber interference detected in multiple defense-linked networks. No confirmed breach, no attribution, no immediate damage. The final line mattered most. Source unknown. Pattern inconsistent with previous Iranian activity. Hale leaned back, staring at the ceiling of the Situation Room. Unknown was worse than hostile. Hostile could be deterred. Unknown had no doctrine in Tehran. President Reza Farhadi received a similar briefing. He read it silently, then dismissed everyone except his military advisor. Farhadi was not a man prone to panic. He had survived sanctions, internal unrest, and years of diplomatic pressure. But this was different. This was fog, and fog was where wars liked to hide. Farhadi knew one thing with certainty. If Iran appeared weak, pressure would follow. If Iran appeared aggressive, retaliation would be immediate. The space between those two outcomes was narrowing by the hour. Somewhere in the Persian Gulf, an American carrier strike group adjusted its formation officially. It was a routine maneuver, and officially, it was a message. Iranian radar stations tracked the movement. Missile crews were placed on elevated readiness. No one fired. No one spoke publicly. The silence grew heavier. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres felt it before he understood it. He had been deployed 3 times before, but this felt different. There was no clear mission yet, no defined enemy movement, just waiting. Endless waiting. His unit was stationed at a forward operating base that technically did not exist. Official maps showed desert. Reality showed concrete antennas. And men pretending not to think too hard about what would happen if the first shot was fired. Torres cleaned his rifle for the 3rd time that night, hands moving automatically round him. Other soldiers did the same. When men stopped talking and started cleaning weapons, it usually meant something was coming in Iran. Revolutionary Guard units were quietly repositioned. Civilian traffic continued above ground. Markets opened. Children went to school. The world outside did not know how close it was to the edge. Then came the incident. A U.S. surveillance drone, operating in contested airspace, lost signal for exactly 19 seconds. When contact was restored, its telemetry showed a course deviation minor, but undeniable. Iranian air defenses locked on briefly before disengaging. Washington saw it as harassment. Tehran saw it as provocation. Neither side wanted war. Both sides began preparing for it. Media narratives hardened within hours. Analysts appeared on screens, explaining history. drawing red lines on digital maps, warning of consequences. Social media filled the gaps with fear. Speculation and rage. Diplomacy tried to breathe. But every statement was interpreted as threat or weakness, behind closed doors. Contingency plans were opened that had not been touched in years. Strikes, counter-strikes, escalation letters with no visible top. Michael Torres received new rules of engagement just before dawn. The language was careful, defensive, conditional. But one sentence stood out. Commanders are authorized to act decisively in the event of hostile intent. Hostile intent had always been a flexible concept in Tehran. President Farhadi addressed the nation briefly. His words were calm, measured, defiant without being explicit. He spoke of sovereignty, of dignity, of readiness. In Washington, President Hale spoke later that day. He emphasized stability, deterrence, and the protection of allies. He did not mention Iran by name. Both speeches were translated, analyzed, dissected. Neither reassured anyone. The first missile would not be launched in anger. It would be launched in fear, and everyone involved knew it. The first explosion was small enough to be denied. It occurred far from capitals, far from cameras, and far from anything that could be easily verified. A fuel depot on the edge of a coastal industrial zone erupted in flame just before sunrise, sending a column of black smoke into the pale sky. Iranian officials called it an accident. An electrical fault. Poor maintenance. No casualties, they said. Nothing unusual. American intelligence disagreed. Thermal satellite imagery showed a precision strike signature, not a missile. Not a bomb. Something cleaner. Something designed to look accidental. The blast pattern was wrong. Too contained, too intentional. In Washington, analysts argued quietly over screens filled with red and yellow overlays. No one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. Someone had crossed a line. The problem was that no one could prove who. President Jonathan Hale listened as the room debated. Intent versus coincidence. Cyber teams reported increased probing against U.S. naval systems. Nothing penetrated, everything tested. Like fingers tapping glass. In Tehran, President Farhadi received word that the destroyed depot had been supplying fuel to civilian infrastructure. Not military operations. That detail mattered. Civilian damage shifted narratives. Civilian damage created outrage. Crowds gathered near the site by midday. Phones recorded smoke, sirens, shouting. Videos spread before officials could shape the story. Rumors moved faster than facts ever could. America did this. Some claimed, this is only the beginning. Others warned. Farhadi ordered restraint publicly, while authorizing readiness privately. He had learned long ago that perception was as lethal as weapons. To appear unprepared was to invite pressure. To appear eager was to justify retaliation. Between those two poles, he walked carefully, at sea. The American carrier strike group received updated threat assessments. Iranian first attack craft were moving, not aggressively, not passively, just enough to be noticed. Drones launched, radars tracked, fingers hovered closer to triggers. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres stood watch as the heat climbed. The desert had a way of magnifying tension. Radios crackled with half-updates. Command spoke in coded phrases that avoided the word everyone was thinking. War, Torres remembered. His first deployment, the clarity of it. Clear enemy, clear mission. This was different. This was waiting for someone else to make a mistake that everyone would pretend was intentional. That mistake came just after nightfall. An Iranian radar installation near the Strait of Hormuz detected multiple fast-moving objects. Approaching restricted airspace, alerts escalated. Operators requested confirmation. None came fast. Enough for 6 seconds. The decision window existed. Then someone fired. The missile arsed upward, clean and precise, slamming into empty sky. No aircraft was hit. No debris fell. But the launch itself was unmistakable. Within minutes, the world knew. News alerts flash. Markets dipped. Military commands went silent as protocols activated. The missile had not struck anything, but it had struck something far more fragile: trust. Washington viewed the launch as escalation. Tehran viewed it as defense. Both could justify their positions with data, with maps, with interpretations carefully chosen to support decisions already forming. President Hale convened the National Security Council again. This time, the tone had changed. Voices were sharper, time frame shorter. Options were no longer theoretical. A limited strike was proposed. Precision, symbolic, a message without full commitment. The word limited did not comfort anyone. In Tehran, Farhadi faced pressure from multiple sides. Military commanders argued that failure to respond decisively would embolden future attacks. Political advisers warned that escalation could fracture already fragile economic stability. Outside, crowds grew louder. History pressed in from every direction. Michael Torres received new orders just after midnight. His unit would be repositioned closer to the coast. No explanation, no timetable, just movement. Convoys rolled under blackout conditions. Engines low, lights off. The kind of movement meant to avoid attention, but also meant something. Was coming. At 3:40 to local time, an American cyber unit detected a coordinated intrusion attempt against regional communication satellites. It failed, but barely. Defensive systems held by seconds. Seconds mattered. President Hale authorized the strike at for 10. It was designed to be undeniable, but contained. A military radar site. No civilian infrastructure. A message delivered in steel and fire, but carefully wrapped in justification. The missile launched from international waters. It flew low, fast and silent. In Tehran, alarm screamed. The radar site vanished in a bloom of white light that turned night into day for a fraction of a second. No one inside survived. The shockwave shattered windows miles away. This time, there was no ambiguity. President Farhadi stood before his advisers as reports flooded in. The room was silent except for the distant echo of sirens through reinforced concrete. "This is war," someone said quietly. Farhadi did not respond immediately. He knew the weight of those words, once spoken officially. They could not be taken back. Outside, Iranian air defenses went fully active. Missiles were moved from storage. Naval units surged outward. Orders flowed faster than confirmations in Washington. Hale addressed the nation within hours. His speech was firm, measured, and deliberately incomplete. He spoke of defense, of protecting forces, of preventing further escalation, while authorizing exactly that. The world listened, holding its breath. Michael Torres heard the distant rumble of aircraft long before he saw them. The sound carried differently at night. Deeper, heavier, final. His radio crackled with instructions that made his mouth go dry. This was no longer a crisis. It was the opening act, and somewhere between fear and momentum. The path forward narrowed until only force remained. By dawn, the maps no longer mattered. What mattered were trajectories, response times, and the simple arithmetic of escalation. Every action now demanded a counteraction. Every delay looked like weakness. Every restraint looked temporary. Iranian state television broke. From regular programming to show images of the destroyed radar site, smoke still rose from twisted metal. The anchor's voice was controlled. But the words were not. Sovereignty violated, martyrs honored, a response promised in the streets. Anger sharpened into purpose, not chaos direction, the kind that could be aimed. President Fahadi signed the authorization without ceremony. No cameras, no speeches. Just ink on paper that unlocked plans written years earlier and updated every month since. Plans designed for the moment deterrence failed. Operation Zulfikar moved from contingency to execution. Across the Gulf, American commanders noticed the shift almost immediately. Iranian naval movements were no longer probing. They were coordinated. Fast attack craft dispersed into formations optimized for swarm tactics. Coastal missile batteries powered up. Their electronic signatures blooming across sensors like sudden stars. This was not preparation. This was posture. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres felt it before he understood it. The air on base changed, not physically, emotionally. Jokes stopped. Movements became efficient, clipped. Everyone checked their gear twice without being told. When the briefing came, it would short. Convoys would move again. This time forward, this time into range. No one asked how long they'd be there. At sea. The first incident happened without weapons. An Iranian drone crossed the exclusion zone around a U.S. destroyer. Not by accident. Not fast. Slow enough to be tracked. Close enough to be unmistakable. American sailors watched it through optics. Fingers ready. Rules of engagement flashed through. Minds trained to follow them exactly. Hold fire, came the order. The drone hovered, cameras pointed, broadcasting the message of unwanted scent. We see you, we are not afraid. Then it turned and vanished. Iranian media played the footage within the hour. The narrative was clear. American ships, powerful but hesitant. Iranian resolve, unshaken. In Washington, advisors warned President Hale that perception was slipping. Deterrence relied on credibility. Credibility relied on action. Another strike was proposed. Larger, louder. Hale delayed. He remembered briefings from historians who spoke of wars that began not with declarations, but with momentum. Once started. No one could find the brakes. That hesitation lasted exactly 12 hours. At 19:26 local time, a commercial tanker struck a naval mine in the Strait of Hormuz. The explosion ripped open its hull, spilling fire and oil into the dark water. The crew survived, barely. The shipping lane closed instantly. Insurance markets panicked. Energy prices spiked. Allies demanded answers. Iran denied responsibility. No one believed them. Satellite imagery showed recent Iranian naval activity near the blast zone. Patterns matched known mine-laying tactics. It was indirect, deniable, and devastatingly effective. The message was no longer subtle. Tehran could choke the world's economy without firing a missile. President Hale authorized full maritime security operations. That authorization included clearance to neutralize Iranian naval assets deemed threatening. The word neutralize did a lot of work. Within hours, American aircraft launched. Their targets were Iranian fast attack craft detected near critical shipping lanes. Precision strikes, minimal collateral damage, maximum signal. The first explosions lit the sea. Iranian vessels burned. Silhouettes briefly illuminated against fire before sinking into black water. Radio traffic spiked. With panic, commands, curses, prayers. Iran responded within minutes. Ballistic missiles launched from inland sites, aimed not at cities, but at U.S. bases across the region. Patriots and interceptors roared to life, streaking upward in intersecting arcs of light. Some missiles were destroyed. Some were not. One struck the outer perimeter of a logistics hub. Another hit a fuel storage area. Fires spread faster than suppression teams could contain them. The night turned orange. Michael Torres was thrown to the ground as the shockwave rolled through. His helmet rang, his ears screamed when he stood. The horizon was burning. This was no longer controlled. This was reciprocal. American media cut to live coverage. Experts spoke over footage of smoke and silence, explaining escalation ladders that no longer applied. Social media filled with speculation, fear, nationalism, conspiracy. In Tehran, Farhadi addressed the nation. His speech was defiant, measured, and carefully framed. Iran, he said, did not seek war but would not submit to intimidation. Any attack would be met with equal force. The crowd roared in Washington. Hill prepared his own address. His advisers urged strength, clarity, resolve. He looked older than he had a week earlier. The speech was broadcast globally. Hale spoke of protecting allies, freedom of navigation, and preventing regional destabilization. He did not use the word war. Everyone heard it anyway. Behind the speeches, behind the flags and statements, something quieter but more dangerous was happening. Cyber operations intensified. Iranian hackers targeted American infrastructure power grids, financial systems, transportation networks. Most attacks failed. Some succeeded just enough to cause disruption, rolling blackouts. Delayed transactions, confusion. The U.S. responded in kind. Iranian communication networks flickered. Government databases corrupted. Military logistics slowed as systems went dark. Orders reverted to people and runners in some units. Modern war revealed its fragility. Late that night, a mistake was made. An Iranian air defense unit misidentified an approaching object. Training said hostile. Experience said shoot. The missile launched without full confirmation. The object was not military. It was a civilian aircraft. The explosion tore through the sky, scattering debris across suburbs. There were no survivors. The world stopped breathing. Footage emerged within hours. Wreckage, personal belongings. Brief, raw, and unfiltered, Iran initially denied involvement, then admitted an error, then blamed. Stress caused by American aggression. None of it mattered. Global outrage exploded. Protests erupted across capitals. Allies pressured Washington to de-escalate. Others urged decisive action before credibility collapsed entirely. President Hale stared at the casualty numbers alone in the Oval Office. This was the moment wars either expanded or paused. Farhadi faced his own reckoning. The tragedy threatened to fracture. Internal support. The narrative of righteous defense cracked under the weight of civilian deaths. Both leaders stood at a narrowing crossroads. Between them lay pride, fear, momentum, and millions of lives. Michael Torres sat on an ammo crate as dawn approached again. He hadn't slept. None of them had. The fires were mostly out, but the smell lingered. He wondered how many decisions had been made overnight that he would never know about. He wondered how many more dawns there would be, because somewhere above politics and speeches, above strategy and justification, the war was no longer about messages. It was about survival, and Chapter 4 would decide whether the conflict stayed regional or became something the world could never contain. The fourth day began with uncertainty disguised as calm. Markets opened cautiously. Diplomatic channels buzzed with activity. Public statements spoke of restraint, investigation, and proportionality. But beneath that surface, militaries moved faster than words could follow. Iran dispersed its leadership. Key officials vanished from public view, relocating to hardened sites built deep into mountains decades earlier. Command authority fragmented deliberately, designed to survive decapitation strikes. The system was old, tested, and brutally efficient. The United States noticed. Satellite analysts flagged the movement within hours. Patterns matched historical war postures. This was not panic. It was preparation. President Hale was briefed in the Situation Room just after sunrise. The intelligence director did not soften the assessment. Iran was no longer positioning to retaliate. It was positioning to endure. That changed the equation. War planners hate endurance. It stretches timelines, drains resources, invites mistakes. Short wars are manageable. Long ones devour presidencies. A new option appeared on the table, risky. Aggressive, potentially decisive. Target Iran's command and control backbone in a single, overwhelming strike. Blind them before they could adapt. Force negotiations from a position of dominance. The room divided instantly. Some argued it was the only way to prevent escalation. Others warned it would guarantee it. Hale listened without interrupting. He had learned that silence revealed more than questions across the ocean. Farhadi faced a different kind of pressure. The civilian aircraft disaster had cracked something. Fragile. Streets that had once chanted defiance now whispered doubt. Mothers demanded answers. Clerics urged patience. Hardliners demanded blood. Farhadi knew hesitation could be fatal not just politically. He authorized a response designed to shift the narrative. Not symbolic, strategic Iran's. Long-range missiles rolled from concealed tunnels under cover of night. Mobile launchers spread across terrain deliberately chosen to complicate detection. Targets were fed into systems that had waited years for this moment. The objective was not mass casualties. It was shock at 3:12 local time. Missiles lifted from Iranian soil in coordinated waves. Their trajectories asked high, then flattened into U.S. military infrastructure across the region. This time, the defenses were overwhelmed. Interceptors destroyed many. But saturation did its job. A missile struck a command facility. Another obliterated a runway moments before aircraft could scramble. Communications faltered. Orders overlapped. Confusion spread. Michael Torres was mid-sprint when the blast hit. The explosion lifted him off his feet and slammed him into concrete. The world went white, then silent. When sound returned, it came as screams and alarms layered over ringing ears. He crawled toward cover, dragging another soldier whose leg bent the wrong way. Training took over where fear tried to live. Nearby, a hangar burned uncontrollably. Aircraft inside were lost before they could fly. The strike lasted less than 10 minutes. The damage would last years. American media broke into non-stop coverage. Maps lit up with red markers. Analysts stopped speculating and started acknowledging reality. This was now a war. President Hale authorized the counter-strike within the hour. This one would not be limited. Stealth bombers lifted from distant bases, refueled midair, and vanished into classified airspace. Submarines repositioned silently. Their crews aware that history would remember this patrol regardless of outcome. Cyber units unleashed tools never before activated. Iranian air defense networks flickered, then went dark. Radar screens filled with ghosts and blind spots. Conflicting data paralyzed response units. Then the bombs fell. Precision-guided munitions struck missile depots, drone facilities, naval bases, and hardened bunkers, each strike chosen to degrade Iran's ability to continue, not to collapse the state outright. But perfection is an illusion. One bomb missed its intended depth and detonated too. Shallow, the blast killed not just soldiers, but workers living nearby. Footage emerged within minutes, framed without context. Iranian media seized it instantly. The narrative flipped again. Farhadi addressed the nation that night with fire in his voice. Iran, he declared, was under existential attack. Defense was no longer enough. Retaliation would be absolute. Words echoed far beyond Iran. Israel raised readiness levels, Gulf states evacuated diplomats, Russia and China issued statements calling for immediate cessation while quietly watching American resolve. The world held its breath behind closed doors. Back channels ignited, Swiss diplomats, Omani intermediaries, messages passed without signatures. Without guarantees, each side searched for an exit that didn't look like defeat. But the battlefield had its own momentum. An Iranian proxy group launched rockets toward a U.S. embassy compound. Most were intercepted. One was not. The explosion kills all personnel, including a civilian contractor. Names were released. Faces appeared on screens. Grief hardened into resolve. In Washington, pressure mounted for decisive action. Senators spoke of red lines crossed beyond repair. Commentators invoked history's darkest lessons. President Hale stood at the edge of an irreversible choice. So did Farhadi. Michael Torres said. Against a concrete wall, hands shaking despite himself, he cleaned his rifle mechanically. Over and over, though it didn't need it. Round him, the base felt smaller, tighter, like the walls were closing in. He thought of home. He thought of how this war had begun not with invasion, not with declaration, but with miscalculation stacked on miscalculation until no one could tell where restraint had ended. Above them all, satellites watched, recording every movement, every flash, every mistake. Because Chapter 5 would not be about escalation. It would be about consequences, and the world was running out of time. The final phase of the war did not begin with an explosion. It began with exhaustion. By the fifth day, both nations were bleeding in ways no press conference could explain. Ammunition stocks were thinning. Crews were operating on fragments of sleep, systems designed for short, decisive engagements were stretched past tolerance. Most dangerous of all, decision-makers were tired. History shows that wars rarely end when one side collapses. They end when both sides realize the cost has crossed a line that no victory can justify. President Hale stared at a classified briefing marked with a single word in red: escalation. Paves. At the top of the page was the scenario no one wanted to discuss out loud: limited nuclear exchange, tactical use, contained fallout, strategic messaging. The lies were built into the language. There is no such thing as contained. Across the ocean. Farhadi reviewed his own version of the same nightmare. His advisors spoke carefully, choosing words that wouldn't sound like fear. Iran still had options, long-range capabilities, asymmetric responses, allies who might intervene. But Farhadi understood something they did not want to admit. Iran could hurt the United States. The United States could erase Iran. That imbalance was the shadow hanging over every conversation. In the early hours before dawn, a final incident pushed both leaders to the edge: an Iranian missile battery, operating under degraded communications, launched at what it believed was an incoming strike package. The target was misidentified. The missile crossed into the airspace of a neutral nation before self-destructing. The radar tracks were seen by everyone. For 7 minutes, the world believed a wider war had begun. Emergency sessions were called. Hotlines lit up. Nuclear forces shifted readiness levels not to launch, but close enough to terrify everyone who understood what that meant. Michael Torres felt it. Without knowing the details, the base went silent. No engines, no radios, just waiting. He had never been more afraid than in that stillness, because silence meant someone, somewhere, was deciding whether the world would still look the same tomorrow. The call came through back channels first. Not public, not official, a proposal. carefully worded, carried by intermediaries who understood that tone mattered as much as terms. A ceasefire, not a peace treaty, not an admission, just a pause. Both sides would halt offensive operations simultaneously. Naval movements would freeze. Aerospace activity would scale down. Cyber operations would cease under neutral observation. Each side could claim restraint. Each side could survive politically. President Hale took the call. Alone, Fahadi did the same. They did not speak directly. That would come later, if at all. For now, the messages passed through neutral voices trained to remove emotion. Hale hesitated longer than his advisers expected. Not because he wanted more war, but because he feared what stopping would look like. Then he thought of the civilian aircraft, of the burned bases, of the fact that history would judge this moment harder than any strike. He authorized the pause. Fahadi followed minutes later. The order rippled outward through command structures strained, but intact. Missiles stayed in their tubes. Aircraft returned to base. Naval radar screens remained bright, but weapons stayed cold. At 6 o'clock local time, the guns fell silent. Not everywhere at once, not cleanly, but enough. Michael Torres heard it. When the alarms didn't sound, minutes passed, then hours. He realized his hands had stopped shaking. Across the world, news outlets struggled to explain what had happened. There was no victory footage, no surrender. Just satellite images of forces no longer moving toward each other. Markets stabilized cautiously. Protests shifted tone from rage to mourning. The war had lasted days. The consequences would last. Decades. In the weeks that followed, investigations began. Quiet negotiations expanded. Sanctions shifted. Alliances adjusted. Everyone claimed lessons learned. But beneath the official narratives, something more permanent had changed. The illusion of control was gone. Nations had stared directly into the abyss, not through history books, not through simulations, but in real time, with real people dying because systems failed and humans misjudged. Iran emerged wounded but unbroken, its population more skeptical, its leadership more guarded. The United States emerged dominant but shaken, forced to confront how close power had brought it to catastrophe. And soldiers like Michael Torres returned home carrying memories that would never fully release them. He would be asked someday what the war was like. He would struggle to explain that it wasn't the fighting that haunted him most. It was the waiting, the knowledge that the world's fate had rested on a handful of exhausted people choosing restraint instead of pride. The war would not be remembered for who won. It would be remembered for how close everyone came to losing everything, and that, more than any explosion, was the sound the world would never forget.